It's been a few months since I last updated my tier list in legendary form, and as promised, I'm here to deliver the long-awaited Season 23 update to the legendary weapon tier list. Today we're going to be going over special and power weapons, and in the next video I'll go over the best in-slot primaries like I mentioned last year. As usual, if you want to see the finer details of what was changed from last season, you can check out the changelog tab in the spreadsheet linked in the description. But for now, let's start with special weapons. Starting with shotguns, one of the biggest improvements I made from last season was more accurately rating certain archetypes. I think I overrated aggressives and underrated lightweights a bit, which I compensated for this season by adjusting quite a few shotguns up and down, including 7 Seraph CQC-12 and Ragnall D for example. I also underrated Heritage a little, as I still find its recombination and kinetic affinity to be very potent in the current sandbox, regardless of my overall feelings on the slug archetype. When it comes to new additions, Retrofuturist Season 23 version has much more compelling PvE perks, including Slick Draw, Autoloading Holster, Frenzy, and Trench Barrel, so I bumped it all the way up to A tier. Super Cluster, the new seasonal slug, also made a decently strong showing, ending up next to Fortissimo 11 in the B tier thanks to its very solid perks but mediocre affinity and archetype. I also restructured the way I group snipers. In the S tier, we have only the Supremacy and Succession, since they were the only two snipers that I think have enough utility that they expand being only great for boss damage or only great for utility use cases. The A tier is strictly best case boss damage options in one scenario or another, like Twilight Oath or Distant Tumulus, and the B tier is all snipers that have great perks but a mediocre archetype, or vice versa. In C tier, I chose to group a huge number of snipers, all of which are what I would call indistinguishable or just usable, since they all have some sort of mag or reload assist and a decent damage perk. Finally, the D tier is reserved for awful options. As for new additions this season, Twilight Oath's new Envious Vorpal roll is worth a shout in the A tier, since I think it's the best swap option when you don't need to care about ammo or firing line requirements, especially since Tumulus is currently not easy to farm. Finally, Naeem's Lance, the Warlord's Ruin Strand 140, fits the B tier build pretty well, with Reconstruction and Precision Instrument being decent together despite the lackluster affinity. After mulling over fusion rifles for the past couple of months, I've gained a greater understanding of how the weapon fits into the endgame meta. Essentially, fusion rifles are used for either utility purposes like stunning a champ using unstopped fusion or bursting a major, or for super chunking in extended boss damage contexts. In both scenarios, high impact frames are usable but either unwieldy due to their long charge time or less effective thanks to their low bolt count. As a result, I moved all of the high impacts into B tier, with Riptide remaining as the only S tier fusion along with the new Scatter Signal in A with Royal Executioner and Cartesian Coordinate. New Glacioclasm gets a B tier spot next to Eremite and Loaded with the addition of Controlled Burst and Overflow to its arsenal, and logically the game's first rapid fire fusion with Controlled Burst and Enhanceable Overflow gets a spot in the A tier as well. We didn't get any change GLs this season, just Undercurrent, so let's start with that. Voltshot on Undercurrent has been experimented with for a while and the jury seems to be out. It's decidedly worse than Chain Reaction, requiring a kill reload and only activating once per shot, even if we ignore the lack of Soul Drinker. That being said, it is the only energy waveframe with Demolitionist, which does boost its ranking up past a low tier. I decided to place it in the B tier alongside waveframes like Deafening Whisper and Harsh Language, which I view as utility-oriented rather than purely ad-clear focused waveframes. Besides that, I slightly readjusted a few other placements on this list, with some Blinding GLs moving up as I feel I underrated them. My Glaive tier list invoked a lot of discussion in the comments, and it definitely was something I strongly reevaluated this season. Glaives are primarily defensive tools, but through some damage testing this season with new Worm Gods, I've discovered that they're fairly potent for offensive ventures as well. However, one could make the argument that you would probably be better served just going full on into a 1-2 punch grapple melee build instead of spamming glaive melees if you want to do melee damage, which would be a correct assessment. As a result, I moved almost every glaive in the previous tier list to more accurately reflect the defensive capability of glaives with a focus on buffing shield uptime and quality of life. Most notably, Nezaric's Whisper is now in the S tier as a result of its craftable status with access to Demolitionist, Lead from Gold, Frenzy, and the Extrovert Origin trait, along with the best defensive archetype. The new Albedo Wing from this year's Dawning also makes an appearance as the only A tier glaive thanks to its solid utility perks in Field Prep, Demolitionist, and Lead from Gold, as well as the potential for offense in the Grave Robber and Close to Melee combo. Power weapons are up next. Let's start with machine guns. I made a few missteps when ranking these last season, so I want to go out of my way to correct them here. First, the two stasis machine guns Recurrent Impact and Chain of Command were ranked far too low, with the former combining Subsistence, One for All, Headstone, and Land Tank, and the latter with the classic Demolitionist and Adrenaline Junkie combo with a solid archetype. As for the other changes, Avalanche moves down a tier thanks to its low reserves, Corrective Measure moves up a tier thanks to the potent Demolitionist and Firefly combo, and I've also refined the bottom two tiers a bit by separating some of the better LMGs and moving them up. Finally, Marcato 45, the Strand Adaptive Machine Gun from this season, breaks into A tier with a never-before-seen combo of Demolitionist with Onslaught and Golden Tricorn, something I've been wanting to see for a while. Heavy GLs did not have any new additions or even changes this season, so there's not much to say here. I've made a few readjustments to certain options, but nothing too noteworthy besides a Cosmic, which was released after I made my first video. It's currently sitting in B tier alongside other rapid-fire GLs like Marcelion C that lack Enhanced Surrounded. Admittedly, I was a little lazy when ranking swords last season, and I wasn't as sensitive to archetypes as I could have been. This season, I refined the separation between A and S tier, ensuring that it is clear that Bequest is the best damage sword in the game, and that the other half stands above other adaptives as a movement sword with usable damage perks. In other news, I've shifted Vortex frames down, not sure why Death's Razor was an A tier, and Aggressive frames up, owing to their consistency compared to adaptives. Unfortunately, the two newest swords added to the game are both casters, so both of them reside in D tier, while the Abide the Return Reprise sits in B tier with other decent adaptives. Only two changes were made to the Rocket roster this season, the Sleepless Reprise and the addition of Crux Termination 4 to the World Drop pool. I made some small adjustments outside of those rockets, with Hezen dropping a tier thanks to its lackluster perks by Season 23 standards, and a few others dropping for similar reasons. As for the changes, Sleepless jumps 2 tiers from D to B, thanks to the addition of Bipod to its perk pool, making it a usable GM or Roam rocket. Crux Termination, on the other hand, is starting strong at S tier. Slideshot on a rocket is already good enough, but with Bipod, Surrounded, Clown Cartridge, Reconstruction, Wildcard, and an Aggressive frame, yeah, this one's definitely S. The last weapon type we have to talk about in this video is none other than the Linear Fusion Rifle. I've also taken a step back and readjusted my stance on archetypes for these weapons. First, the difference in total damage between aggressives and precisions isn't as high as I originally thought it was during the creation of the old linear tier list. For reference, Briars with Enhanced Surrounded reaches 3.7 million total damage, with Cataclysmic at 4.5, but only if you do perfect triple 4 times a charm procs every mag. The DPS difference also isn't very high, but it's enough to shift the overall balance in favor of aggressive linears. As a result, I've actually placed the new aggressive linear Doomed Petitioner at the top spot in S tier above Cataclysmic. While Briars has a weakness in lacking a really strong damage perk that isn't conditional like Surrounded, Doomed has both Surrounded and Precision Instrument, which fully activates in 2 shots, on top of having access to Envious and Reconstruction, and presumably a 1-day fixed Dragon's Vengeance origin trait. As for the other changes, I've shifted some of the lesser linears down a tier to allow Briars its own space in A tier, but that's about it. That about summarizes the changes to the legendary weapon list this season. Look forward to the primary video coming out next, and of course we'll be revisiting the exotic weapon and armor tier list for this season as well. See you then!